Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to continue with the reading and commentary of Answer to Job. Fortunately, I have just a minute, I have to reset my sound, just a moment. Okay, that should help. All right. Fortunately, I have a text to work with because it's been quite a week since last Wednesday. And maybe I'll talk about it, assuming Jordan shows up or someone else. But it was an intense week in which I had to put on my rusted armor in 10 minutes time and rescue a damsel in distress. And it took the whole rest of the week until yesterday. So paragraph 560. The book of Job is a landmark in the long historical development of a divine drama. At the time the book was written, there were already many testimonies which had given a contradictory picture of Yahweh, the picture of a God who knew no moderation in his emotions and suffered precisely from this lack of moderation. He himself admitted that he was eaten up with rage and jealousy, and that this knowledge was painful to him. Insight existed along with obtuseness, loving kindness along with cruelty, creative power along with destructiveness. Everything was there, and none of these qualities was an obstacle to the other. Such a condition is only conceivable either when no reflecting consciousness is present at all, or when the capacity for reflection is very feeble and a more or less adventitious phenomenon. A condition of this sort can only be described as amoral. Okay, so that's paragraph 560, and this is actually the first paragraph of Answer to Job after the preliminary comments that Dr. Jung made in Lectori Benevolo that we've been working with for 2 weeks. Let's see now. Lectori Benevolo we worked with for 2 weeks, but paragraph 560 is actually the main body of Answer to Job, the first paragraph, keeping in mind that these paragraph numbers are numbers in volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And so therefore, Answer to Job is right in the middle of that large volume of collected works. And otherwise, this would probably be numbered it would be number 1 if we didn't number the Lectori Benevolo. So right away, there's important things to discuss here. The first of these is the first sentence where Jung says, the book of Job is a landmark in the long historical development of a divine drama. Now, what he means by the divine drama here is that these are developments of what God is, what God represents in the psyche of man, keeping in mind that we're not talking about a physical God who is either up there or down there, but we are talking about God as a psychic entity. And as such, God is developing. And, some people have said, well, God is, or Jung actually said, God is the unconscious and the collective unconscious. So your God, or your God image, as he was sometimes referred to, is yourself, and the all-knowing God everywhere is the collective unconscious on a global basis. And so that God had to develop in the human species, in our psyches. And so the result was that a divine drama took place in which God is learning a few things as he goes along. And that's what Answer to Job is about, because Job is being attacked by Satan. Keep in mind that the setup for the book of Job is that Satan decides to make a wager with God that he can get Job to denounce God or give up on his faith. And God says, no, you won't. And so they make a bet. And so Satan starts doing nasty things to Job. And Job comes back by making his appeal to the good side of God, keeping in mind that many of the ancients already knew that God was a duality of both good and evil. And so Dr. Jung has multiple times mentioned God doing good with his right hand and bad with his left hand. And we've seen that in the form of terrible hurricanes or tornadoes across the Midwest of the United States. If those are acts of God, and we have to assume that they are because they're part of God's plan, then those are coming out of the bad side of God. Whereas when FEMA comes in, or the federal government, and rebuilds your home or helps you rebuild your home, that's the good side of God, after the bad side has done his worst. And so the result of that is that we have a divine drama that's going on in the collective psyche. And we don't know exactly what it is, because it's been a kind of chaos for the last 2,000 years. The Catholic Church attempted to put boundaries on it and dogma on it by saying, this way or the highway, and anybody that didn't agree with the Catholic Church could find themselves with hot toes on the stake, being burned at the stake. And even Galilei was under house arrest in Italy for the last 4 years of his life, during which time he invented two new sciences. So that's man's inhumanity to man, and it's possible that the church does it too. There were a few people in the 16th century who took exception to the Catholic Church's control of all things theological. And that's when you had Martin Luther and the schism, and the Renaissance, so that the Protestant Church broke away from Catholicism, and then it broke into at least 400 recognizable sects. And the Catholic Church itself, I understand, is broken into 5 sects, although I don't personally know what the sects are. But obviously, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, normal Roman Catholicism, and I don't know what else. Maybe we can think of the we can think of some of the Franciscan brothers or the Jesuit brothers as a breakaway sect. Good morning, Joel. Welcome. Nice to see you here today. And you're also welcome to join us on, or join me on this panel if you'd like. So anyway, and Justin, if I don't know whether you're asking what's cracking is what's going on, or what is the definition of kraken. And I would just say that we're skewering the mythical presentation of God, and we're talking about God as we really experience him in our everyday life. So I take the divine drama as meaning it's a psychological development of the entire human species. And obviously we're still quite far from being unified, so in that perspective. And so, you know, pieces of it come up in many different parts of the collective. Yeah, Justin says Galilei was a medic, so all it took to persuade him to withdraw his claims was showing him the torture chamber. Yeah, probably true. And you know, I'm sure that worked for lots of people. And you know, it wasn't good for the development of humanity because it kept us from realizing reality, and it, in a sense, it still does, because we're all canalized by certain dogma that are in the psyche, whether true or not. Justin said he thought what's cracking was an American slang for how's it going, how's going. I would say it the way I used it. I think if I say let's get cracking, it means let's get going in my vernacular, but others may use it differently. So anyway, this divine drama has always been going on since humanity started to realize itself and recognize itself as individual beings. And it's been going on ever since. You know, what is God? How is God affecting us? And so the problem is that everybody over the last 2,000 years pretty much got canalized into thinking of God in a certain way, God up there, God, devil down there. And so that causes a lot of agnosticism and such, because people don't think they have to have God in an objective form. And God isn't in an objective form, not at all. And that's what Dr. Jung is saying in answer to Job. Okay, so let me just go on. And I've sent, if you have signed up for the Sunday group, you would have received about 20 minutes ago the links to come on and join me. Please feel free to come on and join me. I'm not sure how long I can go without a talking fellow commentator to help me. And maybe Jordan will make it, I don't know, but he's sometimes unable to because of technical issues where he is, and things come up. So I did communicate with him overnight, and he indicated he would be here, but he's not yet. Okay, so paragraph 561, keeping in mind this is the second paragraph only of Answer to Job, the main text. And I'm going to just mark these paragraphs with my numbering system so I know what they are. Okay, how the people of the Old Testament felt about their God, we know from the testimony of the Bible. That is not what I am concerned with here, but rather with the way in which a modern man with a Christian education and background comes to terms with the divine darkness, which is unveiled in the book of Job, and what effect it has on him. I shall not give a cool and carefully considered exegesis that tries to be fair to every detail, but a purely subjective reaction. In this way, I hope to act as, just when I get the page turned, it's so old, okay. So let me start that sentence again. In this way, I hope to act as a voice for many who feel the same way as I do, and to give expression to the shattering emotion which the unvarnished spectacle of divine savagery and ruthlessness produces in us. Even if we know by hearsay about the suffering and discord in the deity, they are so unconscious and hence so ineffectual morally that they arouse no human sympathy or understanding. Instead, they give rise to an equally ill-considered outburst of affect and a smoldering resentment that may be compared to a slowly healing wound. And just as there is a secret tie between the wound and the weapon, so the effect corresponds to the violence of the deed that caused it. All right, now he's using some very psychological terms here. He's using the term let's see. He's using the terms objective and subjective. And so first of all, what that is, objective would be anything out there in the world that you can see and put your fingers on, etc. And subjective would be anything that is in the psyche, but nowhere else. So it's not a physical object, and it's part of the subject, namely you. You're the subject of your life, just like the subject of the sentence is what the sentence is about. You are about your life. And so he's using objective and subjective, and he's saying that he has to use ruthlessness and savagery, and that's probably true, because in order to make the change in our psyches that is needed, he had to be pretty brutal with the Catholic dogma, among other things. And that's why this book is still a highly controversial book in the world, and why theologians don't turn to it, because they think that everything is covered in the Bible, and therefore, why do we need to think differently? And the problem is, people aren't believing in the Bible much anymore. Yes, there are 2 million practicing Christians, but how many of those really believe in the literalness of the Bible. I'm sure there are some, but a lot of people just say, what's that about? Without understanding that they really need to know. Now, on the YouTube chat, I am seeing some troll activity, so I'm going to have to stop from time to time and remove these trolls who can mess with our work. But furthermore, they're advertising Russian pornography for the most part. So I did, let's see, I blocked that one. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not going to I'm not going to block Torup for his comment about Bitcoin is the freedom sword, because maybe it is, and this is something that I'm currently struggling with, and so I'm going to leave it for the time being, and we'll come back to it. Now it looks like Jordan may have joined me now, so yes, here he is. Okay. Welcome. Let's see. There you are.
The word troll. Yeah, I came in on that. That's appropriate. Hold on, let me get my video. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Jordan is not the troll. Jordan is a fellow commentator.
Oh boy. Yeah, I Bitcoin under the bridge is my joke. So I find I have to monitor my accounts more now for a different kind of spam that's a little more aggressive.
Yeah.
I don't know where we are now in terms of the conversation.
Well, I've gotten through paragraph 561. So
okay.
I've read 2 paragraphs. I spoke about the divine drama and about the meanings of the subjective and objective. And let's see, there was one other thing. Equally ill-considered outburst of affect. So affect would be you're displaying a certain emotion that's coming out of you. And so affect is an observed emotion, I suppose. Do you concur, Jordan?
I do. And it's interesting because yesterday, Mysterium Conjunctionis was up in my head. And the difference between suffering and wisdom, especially as relative to grief. And it's interesting to me that I don't know at this point, which paragraph. I posted something yesterday, but which paragraph in Mysterium Conjunctionis it was, but there was just this.
Wait a minute. I think you may be confusing some ideas. It's not Ethereum. It's Mysterium Conjunctionis. Okay.
No, did I say Ethereum?
You said Ethereum.
So okay. Well, topic of the day.
We have Ethereum on our minds, but the book that Jordan is referring to in Dr.
Mysterium Conjunctionis
is Mysterium Conjunctionis, the mystery of the conjunction.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's beautiful. That's a bad Jungian slip instead of a Freudian slip. But it was interesting to me the difference between suffering and wisdom, and that they are combined and they are dancing in that. Yes, I concur fully, because it's like without wisdom there is no legitimate suffering, but without suffering, there's no legitimate wisdom. And it was interesting. And I need to find the paragraph. Jung evidently put it better than I would. I should try to find that. But
Okay.
it's interesting
go
that
ahead.
I said Ethereum instead of Mysterium, topic of the day. But I'll pause there.
Okay, so Joel Fernando from Brazil is going to join us here momentarily. He's
Excellent.
a professional Jungian analyst from Brazil, and he's going to join our conversation here momentarily. I think I just sent him the link a moment ago, so hopefully he will have it then. So, okay. Joel, if you did not receive that link, please advise me. So if anyone wants to get in on these discussions on a face-to-face basis and on a professional style academic basis that we could discuss these things, you're more than welcome to join us and go to our MailChimp sign up and say that you want to participate on Sunday mornings, and you will be getting all the notices. And I will.
So I was
ahead.
late today. Did you play a what is cryptocurrency game before I got here in terms of
No.
Okay. I know
cryptocurrency hasn't come up as yet.
Okay. I know you thought that we might have that conversation today, but now I get it. So, okay, just want to make sure I'm up to speed.
Yeah, you're up to speed.
On 562.
Yeah, 562. Would you read that? And I'm going to meanwhile help everybody.
I sure will.
Okay.
Paragraph 562, answer to Job. The book of Job serves as a paradigm for a certain experience of God, which has a special significance for us today. These experiences come upon man from inside as well as from outside, and it is useless to interpret them rationalistically and thus weaken them by apotropaic means, which I believe is tropism, meaning influenced by context. It is far better to admit the affect and submit to its violence than to try to escape it all by sorts of intellectual tricks or by emotional value judgments. Although by giving way to the effect, one imitates all the bad qualities of the outrageous act that provoked it, and thus makes oneself guilty of the same fault. That is precisely the point of the whole proceeding.
Okay.
The violence.
Okay, go ahead. The violence.
The violence is meant to penetrate to a man's vitals, and he to succumb to its action. He must be affected by it. Otherwise, its full effect will not reach him, but he should know, or learn to know, what has affected him. For in this way, he transforms the blindness of the violence on the one hand, and of the affect on the other, into knowledge, which to me explicates affect, effect, the superficial versus the actual substance.
Okay, well, let me just cover a couple of things here. One is I've got the definition of apotropaic up, and it is
good.
An adjective meaning supposedly having the power to avert evil influences or bad luck, like a apotropaic statue, for example.
Okay, so not like tropism. Okay, that's a. Can you read that again? That's a good, wonderful
Yes.
distinction.
Supposing that supposedly having the power to avert evil influences or bad luck. So how did he
Okay.
use it? Oh, here it is. Just a minute. These, and it is useless to interpret them rationalistically and thus weaken them by apotropaic means. Okay, so we're not trying to talk about the evil of God by using a talisman of some sort, a little statue or something, or an evil eye that the Turks like to use in their houses. But or the Greeks and the Turks, I guess. And so you're not doing that. What we want you to do is understand that Dr. Jung is saying that he is doing violence to the last 2,000 years of sort of the common knowledge of God, let's say, the way God, the way the idea of God developed in the psyche of Western man, both Catholicism and Protestantism, where God is up here and the devil's down here. No, they aren't. They're both right here. And that is the divine drama, and we're a part of it. And Dr. Jung was consciously saying in the mid-1950s, this is what it is. It is not, and he knows that he's going to cause people to react emotionally to that idea because it's contrary to everything you probably ever, if you live in the West, you probably were brought up either directly or indirectly around Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all three of which are Abrahamic religions, Abrahamic religions. And so therefore we have sort of a common root. And Dr. Jung is now saying, forget all that, because that was a way to talk to early Iron Age men, primarily, not women, a way of talking about God to early Iron Age men before people understood psychology at all. This is how they were doing it. But now that myth has developed up, but now we're saying, yes, you can have an experience of God, which I confirm, certainly. I certainly had one the last 4 days. And you can have an experience of God, but it isn't the God that those people were selling you for the last 2,000 years. That God is within you. And so,
that's a wonderful way to put it, especially going to find your video. If you put the link for the people in the YouTube audience, Finding the Living God, because what's interesting, I a little bit earlier, I was hung up on tropism instead of apotropaic. And what's interesting about that, though, is tropism is like, for example, a plant in response to an external stimulus will turn, for example, towards the sun. But apotropaic then is that reasons are unreasonable. And it's the inner, not the external influence, that is the one that Jung is driving at here.
Yeah. Right. So the point is in Finding the Living God that there is a living God. The living God lives within you. Okay. And so Jung came along in the next generation after Nietzsche, who said God is dead, but he was merely stating what people knew for a long while, which was that the God as sold to us is no longer there really, because I think most men and lots of women don't actually believe it anymore. I mean,
Well, yeah,
there
and
are plenty that do, but there are, but like if there's 2 million practicing Christians in the United States, that's less than 1% of our population. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say yes, because just definitely that. And it's come to me in the last several days, if I just rephrase, not retranslate, rephrase Nietzsche and say, instead of saying God is dead, I'll say the God of the previous church is dead. He was really referring, I feel, to the fact that actually tropism, influenced by external factors.
Yeah.
He was really simply saying that the God we know, the God we have been taught, the God we have been fed is dead. And the reality is he was, honestly, just back to your video, finding a living God.
Or not dead, just there's no such thing.
There's no such thing. You're right.
Yeah.
He's looking for the living God.
Yeah.
And that comes back to Jung, Mysterium Conjunctionis, and not Ethereum Conjunctionis.
Yeah.
I'll hit it this time and own it. But it's the living God of that divinity within us that he's looking at. And even as inflated as he was, Nietzsche basically autobiographically writing Zarathustra. At the same time, so what? He that's where he was. And it's interesting to me that he came to that point of, God is dead. I kind of feel like that it was also a newspaper title, to, in a sense, of minimize him. Even though he did say it, he was kind of minimizing himself into a communicable title. And so it's cryptic.
Yeah. So, and here's Joel joining us now. And Joel, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Excellent.
And put yourself on video if you don't mind. You don't have to put yourself on video if you don't want to, but good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, Joel.
Good morning.
Welcome.
So thank you very much, Jordan. Many embraces to you, Skip. Good morning.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So one thing we're not saying is we're not saying that the morals of the church and the methods of the church do not work. They work for lots of people. Okay. And they even work if you're agnostic, or even if you're an atheist. If you go to church and participate in the community of church, you're going to benefit from that. And there's no denying that. So even if you're a man and you say, well, I don't believe in God at all, but your wife insists that you go to church every Sunday, that's a good thing, because it calls upon you to live your life in a certain way, which was part of the divine drama. And now we're coming into a new stage of consciousness. Our species is, this is Dr. Jung's point, we're coming into a fifth stage of consciousness, which is sort of above the idea of God as presented there. And once you understand that that's what it is, then you can go to church and you can get a lot out of it. And I don't mean to suggest at all that I haven't gotten a lot out of church, because I have done, and I've had many numerous experiences. And, this, what was it? Wednesday, I, at 11 o'clock in the morning on 10 minutes notice, I had to begin an automobile trip to pick up a friend who was living 400 miles away and bring her back to my home. And that is an 800 mile round trip, which I did single-handedly at the wheel. And I never once had a blink or a moment when I was a little tired. I think it's the longest trip I've ever taken nonstop, where I was the only driver going in the car. And
it's an interesting distance too, because that was my biweekly commute from Santa Fe to Denver, to meet structural engineers, and there was an actual mystical component to the 800-mile commute. 4 hours there, lunch, meeting, return, and it was
you were going 100 miles an hour.
94 usually.
90. It must have been on Interstate 94, so that you could.
Yeah, I-25, and I set the cruise control on 94. I don't know why, but it worked.
Yeah.
I didn't get a ticket, but it's like an 842 miles. I mean, round trip, something. But I laughed that I joked that it was my 800-mile commute, but somehow when I would leave at 5:45 in the morning from Santa Fe and drive there, eat lunch, have 2 or 3 meetings with various consultants, and then turn around and drive back for late dinner at home at 15 minutes to midnight to feed my cat. I would feel refreshed.
Well,
I mean, there was like
you're
a mystical
piker, but I can't. I'm not going to tell online here what happened to me when I got to this location,
Okay,
which was 400
But,
miles away. But it certainly wasn't anything as genteel as various business meetings with architects.
well, no, but it's interesting though that I would come home and it would never fail that at midnight, 15 minutes after I got home, and the next day, I would feel more aware and alive. And it's interesting to me that I should be exhausted. I just drove 800 miles. And I used to joke, well, I'm from Texas, we'll drive 400 miles for a good barbecue. But that was not it. Something about that distance. So, I mean, you just drove that distance basically. And right. There's something about that is,
well, and
I still don't know, but it's
and
liminal.
what we noted, what the two of us who were in the car noted, was that it was like time stopped.
Yeah,
it was a very numinous experience. It was as if time stopped, and because we were driving on the return trip, we were driving all night till 3:10 in the morning, and it was just pretty dull because it was an interstate highway, and we weren't noticing the time. I wasn't feeling tired or any other such thing. Now, Kathy has asked me to provide more meat to the story, and
before you do,
I'm not going to do that. Wait a minute. Just let me finish my sentence.
Okay.
I'm not going to do that on this public session here, Kathy, because there's some privacy issues involved. I will be a little bit more forthcoming in our advanced reading group on Wednesday, and particularly because I missed the session last week because of this event.
Because of this, right.
And so I'm sorry to say on YouTube, on this public thing, it's going to be a little bit more obfuscated for the time being. We may have time to discuss it in a little bit more detail at some future point. And the individual that was involved with me in this event is going to be participating with us one way or another in the confluence that we're doing in Helena, Montana in June.
Well, I think your obfuscation actually brings up a great point of the words we use with numinous experiences, because you say it's like time stopped.
Yeah.
You didn't say time stopped. You said it's like time stopped.
Yeah.
And I always refer to that 800-mile round trip as time dilated. Like it opened up so big and so there that I couldn't see it, which was pretty much another way to describe God. So big and so there, I can't see it. So when you say time stopped, meaning basically time, it ceased to exist.
I mean, we basically entered the twilight zone.
Right.
Okay. The perfect twilight zone. It was
Right.
like we were in this bubble and we were hurling along the interstate highway at 75 miles an hour and zoom, zoom, zoom. And, you know, but nothing was changing around us. So this bubble was there. And yes, the road was coming at us, but you know, that's all.
Well, it's funny you say that with the zoom, zoom, zoom in the bubble, because at that point I had a sunflower bright yellow Chevy Aveo, a tiny little looking Euro trash car, but it would go 120 as easy as it would go 60, and it wouldn't go faster than that, but it went from 0 to its limit like effortlessly. And it's this little zippy thing. And that really contributed to the time dilating, to the time going away, because it was just, I had to be more conscious of my foot. I mean, I love having a 6-speed transmission and a turbo. Convertible's even better. But the thing is, you get your foot into it. I had to make sure actually on the way there that I did not turn the radio on. I did not put a CD in. I did not get inspired in any other way than driving, because the driving itself was the intensity, and I had to keep that in its level calmness. Yeah. Because if I got the radio or a CD going, my foot would and I would downshift way too high in speed, and I would upshift, and I would hang out in that high gear, and my foot would go down and down and it would acclimate to where I was in the intensity, but that was dangerous. And I mean, I learned that on the first trip, almost spinning off the highway, and then went, okay, turn everything else off except the driving, roll down the windows, and just listen to the experience. And it's interesting because that level of a trip is just a length is numinous. And then you had an additional influence of why, you know, in the substance of the trip itself. Yeah.
And so, Kathy, I didn't mean to be off-putting either when you asked your question. It's perfectly normal question to ask, and I actually appreciate your interest in it, and more of it will be revealed over time in certain ways, but there is a lot of sensitivity involved in it, and it's not quite over, honestly. It's over for me for the time being, but it might not be. And so I need to be careful about what I say in public about it. It's not that I feel it's important to be secretive per se, but there are people's lives involved in it. So
well, that brings
I
up
can just in general, just a second. I can I can just in general talk about the intensity of it, as Jordan was saying, but I want to be very careful about the details that I expose publicly here.
Well, I think
Go
that
ahead,
brings
Jordan.
up a wonderful point about boundaries, because with Mysterium Conjunctionis, for example, the mystery of the opposites, comfortability with the not knowing while daily getting things done.
Yeah.
The difference between suffering and with dance partners. But if you have no suffering, you have no wisdom. But if you have no wisdom, there will never be the proper suffering.
Yeah.
And that to me dials right into discretion. About, yes, you have both of these people. This Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, discretion, suffering, wisdom, dance group. But just like now, you're having discretion about then what you're going to communicate. And I think that's an important evolution, I think, from not simply having these experiences and openly sharing them. There is a, not judgmental, but there is a, I think, qualitative decision made as to who you share them with.
Yeah.
And then that's discretion. And I think the beauty of discretion is simply the parenthetical, unspoken question of, have you done the work?
Yeah.
Because, or do you need to do, can I ask you a question that would send you to your work?
Yeah.
So that you can ask your question.
Anyway, so this event involved me receiving a telephone call and realizing that I have to leave right now to go pick this person up.
Boom.
Who was
Right.
400 miles away from me. And so I didn't shave, I didn't shower, I got in the car and I went.
Just boom. Right.
Boom. There was no question about that decision. And we did it. We got home at back to the house here at 3:30 in the morning, or 3:10 or something in the morning. And we had this bubble experience as we traveled. And I'm not going to say anything more about the travel, but I will say that neither one of us on the way back felt sleepy at all. Not at all, right? And
well, it reminds me of paragraph 563. For this reason, I shall express my affect fearlessly and ruthlessly in what follows. There's a zero tiring in that sentence.
Yeah.
And you experienced that next first, a positive portion of the sentence before the comma.
Right. Okay, so go ahead and finish that paragraph, Jordan, so we can comment on it.
For this reason, I shall express my affect fearlessly and ruthlessly in what follows, comma, and I shall answer injustice with injustice, that I may learn to know why and to what purpose Job was wounded, and what consequences have grown out of this for Yahweh as well as for man.
Right.
So, I mean, that to me, in 22 volumes, that to me is the most on fire sentence I have ever experienced from Jung. That I shall, not I will, I shall. I mean, he's still in proper language. I shall answer injustice with injustice. So that's, someone's going to swing and he's going to duck and he's going to come right back over on the upper duck to cross with a right cross or an uppercut. I mean, this is Muhammad Ali in a sentence. I mean, he's going to dance, he's going to duck, but when he raises his head, that other person is dropping. And So when Jung says, I shall answer injustice with injustice, he's stepping up to God.
Yeah. And so I will say one other thing, since I mentioned that the person I picked up is a woman. What happened to us was very, in every essential manner, the archetype of damsel in distress, and the knight in shining armor. Although I learned that at 75 years of age, my armor is a little tarnished, but and the steed is certainly somewhat broken down, but still works. Everything works in the archetype. And in 10 minutes time, I heard the story, and I was heading for the horse, headed for the steed, throwing my armor on and heading for the steed without any question. It's just something where that archetype kicks in, and boy, oh boy, it starts playing that phonograph record, and it won't stop until it's
well. And what's interesting, I mean, even with the emails, they were a little cryptic, but I was thinking, this is not a woman playing the bird with a broken wing. This is life occurring, and I think,
it wasn't a person that was helpless. It was a person
right,
who knew who to call and what to do in the situation.
right, and I think in that regard, I mean, Joel comments on paragraph 563. It's one of the historically on record shortest paragraphs Jung ever wrote. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, and not even really fully 5 lines. And I mean, thoughts on that paragraph? Because to me, Jung was kind of stepping up to the bully, so to speak. This is the preamble almost to, well, I think God bullied Jung, or God bullied Job. I'm going to take up for him on the playground. I mean, thoughts on paragraph 563 from your perspective?
Joel, that was a question for you.
I know. I'm just I am thinking about it. I am reflecting about the question. Well, try to understanding. I think that first of all, answer to Job was the first Jung bestseller, sold millions of copies, but I think that we are dealing with the collective unconscious. I think answer to Job is a reading that we should be familiarized with Jung opus. Jung's works, like familiarized, for example, with the text, a text like the transcendent function, and for example, it's a book of difficult comprehension, and I think And please, I don't want to hurt the feelings of nobody, no one. But I think that is not a book for the middleman.
I'm sorry, for what?
The middleman,
The middleman.
the average
And,
person, right? It's
Yeah, yeah. For the common sense, for example, I'm not being because you must be familiarized also with Thomas Aquinas. What Thomas Aquinas wrote about, and to understand the doc, doctrine of the privatio boni, and I feel that it is very interesting when Jung, for instance, established a dialogue with Thomas Aquinas. And we are talking about how the collective unconscious and how they collect this there is something going on in the collective unconscious itself, and how this development in the collective unconscious reflects in our culture and in our history.
Right.
And I can establish, for example, a connection between answer to job and the number 10 OC, civilization and transition. As a matter of fact, we are living this now, and answer to job for me results for is the result of many years of letters changed between Jung and Father Victor White.
Yes.
It's like two great men engaged in some sort of intellectual esgrima. I don't know if I am using the right word, esgrima.
I don't think it was a disagreement per se, so much as just a different understanding of the same things. Because when Dr. Victor, or when Father Victor White died, Jung made the comment, he came almost all the way, and he basically died within sight of the promised land. He died at the gate of the city of the New Jerusalem, basically. Is something he said, something like that in a letter. I think it was a letter to the sister who had written to Jung saying that he had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And Jung wrote back and said he died within sight of the promise. But
well,
go ahead.
I think that we are answer to job puts us in before an enigma, and we can only answer an enigma with another enigma. But I think that we are dealing, of course. It's clear for us that we are dealing with God's shadow.
Yes.
And
Right.
we, what calls me the attention is the the phenomenon that Jung called God against God.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Jung rose to the equation. He rose to the situation. I mean, it's interesting because when you were speaking, your response, Joel, even skips 800-mile round trip. Answer to Job itself is one long Jungian paragraph. It's he wrote in thoughts, and the answer to Job was 110 page thought in the middle of another book. And what's interesting with that to me is then answer to Job is itself a numinous distance rather than experience. So he played the effect of incorporating a whole nother, as you said, enigma. But he stood up and he put on his gloves to box enigma to enigma. And what's interesting about that is I think as you were speaking, your answer, to answer an enigma with an enigma, that's standing up to a bully. I mean, like Skip has said, everybody's still yellow inside, and they stop. But honestly, everybody's still yellow inside. That's the enigma, because when you stand up, or as Skip, you have the white of your left eye in that portrait.
Yeah.
There's no yellow inside that eye. And that's the one that sees. But everything around it has doubt, has shame, guilt, or experience. And it's interesting. Answer an enigma with an enigma, but answer to Job then becomes a numinous, not experience. Answer to Job becomes a numinous distance, where you have to, in a sense, express and experience the whole reading of it to then come back to, oh, somebody just stood up.
Okay, well, let me, if you don't mind, let me summarize.
Please.
And Joel, after I do my summarization here, please do comment on if you differ from me in my summarization. Dr. Jung was raised in a household where his father was a pastor, and going back 6 generations, they were all pastors. And I think that 7 of his uncles were pastors. They were all pastors. So they were all within the religion. And, like all of us, many people tend to take up their father's work if they can. I mean, even Jordan, though he's a tarot reader officially, he has taken up the work of an intellectual, which is basically what his father's work was.
Exactly. Poet
and
intellectual, right.
Right. Okay. And so the fundamental issue on which Dr. Jung and Victor White differed on was this issue of privatio boni, which you brought up. And privatio boni says that there is no evil, there's only the absence of good, okay, which was a fundamental tenet of the Catholic Church for millennia, okay, still is, okay. So Dr. White, Father White, Dr. White, he was the head of Dominican House at Oxford. And so he was a tremendous intellectual. But he was a Roman Catholic priest, a Dominican priest, and he accepted the dogma of privatio boni, that there's no evil, there's only the absence of good. And Dr. Jung realized at some point in his life, certainly long before he wrote Answer to Job, that evil is a great power. It's not only the absence of good, it is the opposite of good, and therefore a part of God. And this is the crisis that came, that comes with Christians getting their minds around Jung, because he's saying that God is both good and evil. But I would give the example of, when terrible things happen, like there's a tornado or a hurricane. Sometimes American pastors will get up and they'll say, well, that's God's vengeance for that evil New York City. I remember specifically it happened with Hurricane Sandy, where one of these evangelicals says, well, New York City is a den of iniquity, and it's God's vengeance. Well, no, it isn't. It was an event of nature, and there was no consciousness of God doing that, and there was no evil in that per se. But
that's like standing up to God, standing up to the evil in God, to put it in its place, to come back to the God.
Right. And so when we had this string of tornadoes through Tennessee a few months ago, and afterward, this Methodist minister was asked, well, why does God do these things? And his answer was a very good answer. He said, God isn't about tornadoes. God is about how we treat one another after there has been a tornado. And that's the point, that we are physically, we're in a world that is a certain way. It has tornadoes, it has hurricanes, it has snowstorms, etc. But that isn't God doing anything to us. God created the world. Yes, God created the world, but then, it's like Dr. Jung in Man and His Symbols tells the rabbinical joke of God had a bunch of dice in his pocket, and he threw them out on the floor and said, "Let there be a world." that was God's act.
Well, that reminds me of actually the truism that nature knows no emotion. Nature only knows weather. Right. And there is no bad weather. There's only bad wardrobe. Because if people work in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and to qualify that, the Arctic has bears. The Antarctic, there are no bears. That's the difference of the name.
Right.
And so God just simply deals with what is rather than what feels.
Right. And so what is causing theologians so much trouble over the last 60 years or more since Answer to Job was written, and maybe it's almost 70 years now, is that Jung was saying that there is an evil side of God. God is both good and evil. God is not all good. And the significance of what Job did in the Bible was he appealed to the good side of God. And ignored the evil side of God, and he prayed to the good side of God. And he was in the end rewarded for that, and Satan lost the bet because of that. And so one of the things, a side note that I have written here about these 3 paragraphs is that Jung offers himself as the object. Okay, he is not the subject in this, in these paragraphs. He is offering himself as the object because he knows that there's going to be a terrific uproar among theologians, maybe among psychologists, anybody that's involved with people who have problems, psychologists too, because he's saying this contradictory thing that, you know, there's an evil side of God too, and that evil side is a great power, and so ultimately he's saying that. So he's fundamentally denying the dogma of privatio boni. He's fundamentally, and the other one he's denying is summum bonum, which is God is all good. Okay, you know, God is the maximum of good. Well, if God is the maximum of good, he's also the maximum of bad, because you know, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin weren't evil because they didn't get enough mother's milk. You know, it wasn't that. They were evil. Okay, they did evil things, and we have to accept that. And the people that sell this idea that God would send a tornado to hurt innocent people, why does God do that? You know, that's the question that always gets asked. Why does God do that? And and the answer is God didn't do that. God gives us the ability to do what needs to be done after the fact, but God doesn't punish good people.
You bring up a wonderful concept, not just a point, a whole concept there. Hey, Miles, welcome.
Yeah.
But you bring up a wonderful concept where I find people tend to get misguided or misdirected, is that people say God is everything, omniscient, omnipotent, everywhere, all times. I've got a great joke about that, but the relative reality, and I do stress the adjective, the relative reality, then people go on from God is everything to hell is something else, as if he created everything, oh, but hell's not, no, that's an evil place. That's not part of God. Well, no, God is all. And that pre-Lilith.
Yes, it is. Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. And that pre-Lilith inert God with no voice and no consciousness, hell was a thing.
Right.
Except it was just another thing.
Yeah.
Except it had no counterpoint. And then,
by the way, one further comment about my recent experience I would make is I had to go enter hell and bring this person back from hell.
Bring this person back. Okay. Right.
And I've, you know, physically, I know that, and I physically experienced it since last Wednesday.
Right.
And so, and you know, everybody's got their own hell. Okay, everybody has that. And so, as Winston Churchill says, if you're going through hell, keep going. And,
keep going, right? Yeah. So, yeah, don't stop.
Don't stop. Keep going. And so, anyway.
Well, and as I think in a party conversation, he was asked about that. And he said, "Oh, you're going through hell. You're in the right place. Keep going."
Yeah.
Meaning you're fully experiencing life as if no one else was.
Yeah, and so Anders on the YouTube channel says, Jesus said that we must lose our life in order to find our life in Christ. Again, the blackening stage in alchemy, Carl Jung probably discovered things like that when he revived alchemy. Absolutely. Okay, and the alchemists knew all this, okay, but then the alchemists got papered over by the church about 300, well, now almost 400 years ago. And so the last courses on alchemy in university died out about 400 years ago. Now I think alchemy is again being taught at least at Jungian institutes, but
well, and 15 years ago, the University of Kent made the first masters in cosmology and divination, and so in outer regions, so to speak, of academia, it is coming back.
Yeah, it's coming back, and it will come back.
Because University of Kent, I believe, masters of cosmology and divination, and it was I think the first class was 2000.
Right, and so Joel, the other thing we were talking about in this was the divine drama, okay, which is what he's talking about here, which is that the divine drama is the psychological development of the whole human species, as in collective unconscious. Okay, so the whole human species is developing, and it's a fact that's far beyond the reach of any one human being. You know, we can't train our whole species of 8 billion people to be the same. And so that's why it's a drama, because it's all of us clashing together, and what's right prevails, and what isn't right falls away. And so this is why places like Brazil and the United States and Canada have developed uniquely from other parts of the world, because in these places we have embraced our diversity. And so, yes, there are clashes. You know, people around the world don't understand how the U.S. can have all these clashes on the evening news all the time, but those clashes make us stronger. Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
Well, I think that I am a kind of Brazilian who were born maybe in the wrong country, because I love Harley Davidson. I love Route 66. I love the history about Woodstock. I love American history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, Skip, you are very sensitive person, because I did not want to talk to you that I am working in an article that I called America Standing in the Need of a New Appomattox.
A new what?
Appomattox. Appomattox. In the House of Appomattox.
I'm still not understanding that word. So if you would put it in chat, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Okay.
How do you spell that again? It's because Appomattox, it feels beautifully civil.
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Okay, we're going to see it on the chat here so that we can all understand what the word is that Joel is saying.
Appomattox, right?
Appomattox.
Yes, Appomattox.
Okay.
Because I feel, because the house of Appomattox, correct my pronounce, is the house where the treatise of peace between North and South were signed.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
And with Abraham Lincoln. And but the Civil War, we had the risk to reignite, and the running to West neutralized the risk of new civil war, a reignite of a new civil war. And I can, the Vietnam War was an unfolding. I think I have this this feeling, this impression, the unfolding of the civil war.
Yes, yes, surely.
And we have the colors of the parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, blue, red, the color of the flag, this star and stripes, white,
Yep.
red, blue.
Yep.
We have those colors.
Yep.
And after, a little bit before the Vietnam War, we had the fight for civil rights.
Yep.
And
At the same time.
now, yes, at the same time.
Yep.
Martin Luther King died April 4, 1968, I think.
Yes, correct.
And now, the Vietnam War ended.
I'm sorry, Joe, you somehow muted. I'm sorry, we couldn't hear the last. Joel, we cannot hear you. Joel, we cannot hear you. Joel, you have to unmute.
Unfoldings in collective unconscious. I think that the collective, that is happening a new unfolding of the secession war, of the war, the North against South and
Yep.
South against North, and the liberation of the slaves, and we have now an unfolding of the 60s, but historically actualized.
Yeah.
And when I saw George Foley and the Black American people in the streets, just like in the 60s, I thought, it came to my mind.
Yeah,
America is standing in the need of a new Appomattox.
Yes.
You know, that's a
This is the
wonderful
right
point, Joel, because I think what's interesting in the bigger picture is that philosophy and spirituality went from the bigger, fuller, life-affirming spirituality of the Eastern religions and came west to become more superficial, except if I use that from individuation, came west to be younger. So the child became the parent of the adult. But then, of course, that restarts everything. And at that point, then, there is North and South. So we've had the East and the West. And at the end of the sword, we have this U.S. thing going on with North and South. And I think a lot of people think the Latin cross for individuation, the quaternity. But I really think the evolution goes longer like a sword from the east to the west, except the handle is not over here at the beginning. The handle is at the north and the south. As you said, a new epidemos. I mean, a new place of the inner civil war always ends in a dance, as does each of ours. I think your point you're making.
Yes.
Right. And
that's
there's
the point. Because I think that it's a war without guns, without cannons, but
yes.
And also I think that the great pair of opposites, America and Brazil, we are dealing off is between the rational versus irrational, and with the irrational polarity, there is no possibility of dialogue, and the weapons we have to use to heal the wound, and do you know, sometimes I am having the opportunity to talk about this for the first time in my life, but sometimes I kept myself thinking, for example, what kind of president Bobby Kennedy would be. I really do talking to myself, and I think America is standing in the middle of a new appomattox, because the individuation does not have an end. We have telos, but we does not have an end. And individuation is at service of is a process of forgive my English, the formation of conscience.
Right.
And
and that's a great
let's
point,
give it. I'm sorry,
Miles.
Let's
the transcendent function.
Time out, please.
In America.
Let's give Miles a chance.
Okay,
you're on the south, and Miles is in the north, and he's got his hand up.
Okay, thanks. Canada
You
wants
have
to
the
get in
word.
on the house
Sorry.
here.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we
Hi,
speak
Joel.
for the north.
Sorry, I talked too
The
much.
medicine
Sorry.
line here speaking now. The medicine line is what the indigenous people referred to the Canada-USA border, because they couldn't figure out, why is it the U.S. cavalry just all of a sudden stops when we get past this rock? And so medicine to the indigenous people is equivalent to energy. And so there's an energy about this space here where we just get over here, and all of a sudden these guys who are chasing us stop. So anyway, I just had to jump in because of the question Jordan posed about times when it's like, okay, I'm going to react against injustice with injustice. No holds barred type of a thing. Well,
and that was quoted.
So, and to tie in with what Joel's been saying, and the concept of, okay, we are the conscious, and then there's God is the unconscious plus us. In other words, Jung said God is reality, and I got to get my head around that, and it's starting to make a lot more sense now. Talk about a situation where one party, two gods want to meet one injustice with another injustice, potentially, is right now on the border between Russia and the Ukraine. Now, I'm no expert on international relations, but and Skip knows this, Jordan knows it as well. But since I visited the Soviet Union as a teenager in 1976, and this girl looked me in the eyes and said, why does your country want to destroy my country?
Mhm.
It's been a complex of mine, right? And even before I was with this group, for reasons I won't get into too much discussion about, but this album by U2, the Irish rock group, is titled "How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb."
Mhm.
And that's where we're at right now. Like this
Yeah.
is the Cuban Missile Crisis again. If people want to recognize it as such or not, it's up to them. Now,
No, it
I've
certainly
been,
is.
the great thing, as Skip has said, is in the United States, you could get these clashes. You have some of the world's leading whistleblower protection. You have your First Amendment. And, I listened to Donald Trump speaking to Houston just the other day, and I thought, okay, this must be a repeat of a previous speech from some years ago. No, this was just end of January, a couple weeks ago.
Without a
Donald
toilet to
Trump,
flush the paper down, right?
I'm going to get to my point quickly, but Donald Trump at times says stuff that I'm thinking, good for you. Like, man, that makes sense. But then on the other hand, he'll say something like at the end of that speech, oh, worried about ocean rise. That's a big joke. But nevertheless, what I want to get to is I've listened to American professors from prestigious universities such like John J. Mearsheimer, University of Chicago. I've listened to Peter Kuznick of the American University in Washington. He's professor of history and nuclear studies. And then I most recently listened to a gentleman from the Wilson Institute who was an actual negotiator in 1990 when George H.W. Bush took over from Reagan and took on the negotiations with Gorbachev. And the issue right now is what was agreed to back in 1990, whether or not NATO said that, or the West said NATO will not move 1 inch beyond East Germany, or whether they didn't. And in the United States, you have Peter Kuznick and John J. Mearsheimer saying, yes, that's what the Russians believe. And then you have Robert Zolanek, U.S. lead negotiator from those days, was speaking at the Woodward Wilson Center, saying, well, it wasn't you're not really reading the history correctly. NATO didn't pledge not to move west or east of East Germany. But now, whether or not who's right, who's wrong, one of the things I would ask people to consider and invite you to go to the World War II, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans website, and look up deaths by country. How many deaths do you think the Soviet Union suffered in World War II?
40 million.
Well, that's pretty darn close to the estimates here. Total
62.
civilian and military. When you're talking tens of millions, what's the difference, right? 24 million,
Mm-hmm.
according to this.
Well, that's the number of deaths from Joseph Stalin.
Right.
Well, it says death by
wanna-
country. But anyway, let me just wrap
brought
up
up a
because I know
great
you guys
point.
want to talk. But
Okay, now wait a minute.
Canada, 45,000. The United States, total civilian, and we didn't have any civilian deaths in Canada. But the United States, you had 416,800 military deaths and a couple of thousand civilian deaths. So anyway, we can be dead right about
that's
this
right.
issue,
Okay,
right? So anyway, I just had to unload that. Thanks, and look forward to your comments.
Well, it's a good comment. I think that the first thing we have to mention is that Jung believed, and I too believe, that we need some scholars who will go back and rethink all history in the context of the psyche, and what's going on in the collective unconscious. Joel has started to do that by his paper, and he needs thousands of more scholars doing that sort of thing. And, maybe we should have a conference, Joel, where we invite traditional historians who want to talk about timelines, and have a conference where we talk about the process of doing that, going back and reevaluating history. And I'm big on history. I was a history major in college, but I didn't learn anything about psychology from my history class. Okay, number one. And so we have to understand that these processes that are going on in the collective unconscious take place over centuries and millennia. They do not take place by what's decided tomorrow, whether Putin decides to invade or not. But in the end, let me just talk about some of the things that happened historically that Joel was talking about. But I happen to have a certain amount of experience with the Vietnam War, particularly. We understand now that Vietnam was a hot battle in the Cold War, but that's revisionist history. That only started to appear in the 1990s. Back in the Vietnam War days, we thought it was, a war against China, which is one of the reasons I got trained in Chinese, and that it was just a local affair, and it was preventing a country from falling to communist China. But what the Cold War did was it forced the Soviet Union to collapse. It collapsed of its own weight. The reason that Ukraine is free to get today, the reason that the Baltic nations are free to get today, is not because there was a big battle to free them, but it's because the Soviet Union collapsed of its own weight. And so in current affairs today, we have this situation where Putin doesn't quite get it. He doesn't quite get the fact that his country has an economy the size of Italy, and he's got all of the rest of us in the world against him. And he has this dream that he's going to reconstitute the Soviet Union. That's not going to happen. And I'm not saying that he won't take over Ukraine. He might take over Ukraine in the short run, but that won't be the end of it. And
France stepped in, and if France stepped in, France is never the bully. If France steps in, that's like Canada. Sorry, Miles, but it's like Canada stepping in. It's not the strongest kid on the block.
Yeah.
And when they step in, when France steps in, that means a lot.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the Vietnam is a hot battle and a Cold War. Historically, I think that's small fry.
That's right.
And
but
I think Miles brought it up. Miles hit the hot button, to me, nuclear. The reality is not nuclear war. We do not have to have war, malice, anger, or nuclear detonation against someone to have nuclear winter. We have had over 2,400 nuclear tests on the earth. They don't need anger or malice. They don't need weather. They don't need emotion. They have occurred. So our oceans as a trash can, there's the thing. Now, the fact that Sino-Russian That's an historical battle. That's an historical war. The fact that the Sino-Russian War is now Russia and China, no, not a war, it's a union. That's two allegedly looking large things coming together to try to actually be large.
Yeah, that's old ideas about it. Okay, I used to worry about that when I was in the 4th grade, until somebody pointed out to me that the longest border that Russia has is with China.
Right.
And same with China. And so they are very wary of one another. They are not going to form together and do anything because they don't trust one another at the bottom. And, you know, I'm not saying that there won't be a dust up either in the Formosa Strait or in Ukraine. What I am saying is that 100 years from now, these regimes are not going to be there anymore. Okay, even their successors will not be there anymore. I can't predict when, but it's very clear that what works for nation states is to allow diversity to clash together in your society, and that causes a better answer ultimately, because the two clash and a better answer comes forward. And that's what
that actually
that's
occurs
what
every
Joel
250 years.
happens more frequently, but this is what Joel means when he's talking about Appomattox, because when we clashed in the Civil War. Yes, we did. And it was over a very important economic issue. Okay. But in the end, the South could not win because the North was the more powerful economy. And it is the more powerful economy because of diversity and allowing the clashing. And so, you know, all the union clashes that took place over the late 19th and 20th century in industrialized America, you know, that built up Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers and all those other people. But all those fights changed America and strengthened us. Whereas if you go to a place like Turkey or Egypt, they don't allow dissent. And when they don't allow dissent, they hold their countries back. And this is the same thing for Putin. I mean, Putin can have lots of guards following him around, doing goose stepping and all that stuff. It's all window dressing because he, as we know, he's just a bully. And he doesn't have anything.
But Skip, in all due respect, there's a lot that I could say about the United States being a world bully. So, you know,
that's true too.
So I'd like you to actually be a little more balanced at times.
No,
because
I
personally,
agree with,
I find it a bit.
I agree, Miles, because we're the pretty bully. And the problem is that the pretty bully is not the one to support. And I will say this, that the goose stepping and the America's the pretty bully. I want to clarify Appomattox. Clearly, the Civil War was not about civil rights. That came in 1960, etc.
Yeah.
The reality is the Civil War was about greed. It was not at all in any way about dogma or any kind of opinion. It was about cotton and sugar. The North had the money and the South had the product. So that's a supply and demand issue of I'm going to greedily come chew up your stuff. So the Civil War was about cotton and sugar and money, and it was not about anything civil at all.
Cushboo's had a good comment here. To heal truly, everything that's sickening must come to the surface and growth will follow from it.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent comment.
That's what we're talking about, the
I love
clash. And
that. To
so
grow out the pain.
right. And so when yes, there's a bully, but there's also standing up to a bully, Miles.
Mhm.
And so just watch what Biden is doing right now. He's not threatening to send in the U.S. military into Ukraine. He's not proposing to defend, to be Ukraine's protector per se. He's saying explicitly that we will not do that. Okay. He says explicitly, we will not send U.S. troops into Ukraine. But what he has said is that other things will happen. Okay. And on the economic side, Putin cannot win that because he doesn't have an economy that will support it.
I'll just add that being the pretty bully on the block, though, I invite people to explore Sheldon Woolen, American professor of sociologist, recently departed this life, was a World War II veteran in bombers. He has a concept of inverted totalitarianism versus classical totalitarianism. And this is not me, this is an American professor. He says the United States is under inverted totalitarianism, and Canada is as well, I would say too, because the missiles that the United States is supplying to the Ukraine, they're $175,000 a pop. So there's big money to be made whenever we have a war on terror or we are making Russians into enemies. There's tremendous profits being made. Just amazing. And your U.S. debt is now $30 trillion. And, we could argue about whether that's real or not. But anyway.
Yeah, well,
Miles,
back
that's
in the
important
day,
because, back in World War II was war is good for business. That's an old adage. War is good for business. And the problem is war is good for business. And so the greed is always appealed to. Right.
So my point is, yes, the U.S. may, to an outsider, look like a bully often, and I acknowledge that. But the point is the dissent. It's necessary to allow the dissent to flourish in Canada, in the United States, and in Brazil, so that improvement can be had. Okay, Joel, your turn.
First of all, if I said something wrong about American history, please forgive me. But as I say, I love America. I really love America, and I love American history. But when I use appomattox is this the right?
Appomattox, yes.
Appomattox. I think as a metaphor, if we apply analytical psychology with the unfoldings of collective unconscious in America, I thought appomattox as a metaphor. We have when we have a pair of opposites, we have the activation of the transcendent function, and that is my hope. So, Jordan, did you understand that when I talk about appomattox, I was thinking in the house in Appomattox as a metaphor, because the house that the three ties of peace between North and South were signed, America needed to, because a house evokes on us, for example, America as our house. We live in America, so America is our house. We needed, if a house evoke images of intimacy. And so we have to sit on the table and talk what's being wrong. Is this a revival of the civil rights thing, the civil rights question? And that's my point. If I live in America, I don't know how I could do this, but I would study American history, and I would write a master, MD, or PhD, not for just working this issue, this matter.
Mhm.
That's a great point, Joel, because in the best case, the appomattox is the activation of the transcendent function. And it's actually a larger scale example of the civil war that goes on in each of us through the process of individuation.
Yeah.
And I always find it interesting the confidence of children versus the confidence of childish adults. One is childlike and one is childish. And
Yeah.
I laugh that the adult, I mean, there's a grown-up version of childish that's not childlike.
Yeah.
And
So-
it's greedy. And then
Right.
the child, though, will do whatever they want to do, but they usually do it for the good. And what's interesting is then the adults have all these other fragments of baited experiences that have never been fully acclimated, and otherwise call those traumas. And that then the adults who act all, bully on the block are jumping around with a lot of bluster. And, peacocks put their tails down every once in a while, and they're just birds. And what I find is when there's all that bluster, court, bluster, oh, you're all powerful. Really? What's behind you? What are you hiding with the display? And I find then the childish versus childlike becomes, I love the idea of a PhD or a master's with American history that way, because what's behind all that? What was this, as I think Skip said, check the history of rethinking all history in the context of what was going on in a psyche. Because that childish, puerile, that's negative, that's pejorative, versus childlike, that's creative, that's living. And the childish is always a dead snakeskin, but the childlike is the snake its skin shedded, the snake its skin not missed. I left the playground. Now I'm on my bike. I don't think about the playground. I'm on my bike. It's experientially present. So even I hate to cap on the be here now movement. I don't want to call out the author, but at the same time, cool, be here, be present. Okay, now what? Now what? And the thing is, well, live it. Don't just stop in some static be here now place. Be present. Okay, cool. Oh, I will meditate and I'll and I'll be present and I'm hungry. What the heck? Well, the thing is, or I got to go do my laundry, or I need to go to the grocery store.
All right.
So to hold on 1 second, Skip, because to me, this whole rethink all history in the context of what was going on in the psyche is one of the most important, I think, things we can do, so that if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Right.
And
so
we need to know a different way.
That's how I want to conclude today. Joel, would you please tell me again, or write it into the chat, what is the name of the paper you're working on?
America's standing in the need of a new appomattox.
Okay.
That's the paper. And I
Standing in
would
the,
like
what was that word?
It's standing in the
Standing-
need of a new
Need.
appomattox.
Okay,
standing in the need.
okay.
And I would like to challenge. Well, an idea came to me when I was listening to Miles. And Skip, you are the boss here. I would like to propose a challenge to you and to bring the historian scholars for a series of lectures, even if it is online. And please don't get angry with me. Don't get mad with me about these. I think that we have a point, and we could do something about it. And this is the challenge that I am proposing to you now.
Well, Joel, it's really
Okay.
amazing that you proposed that. Are you talking to me? Are you challenging me to do this, or
No,
Skip?
no. While I was listening to you, this idea came to me because
Yeah.
Well, it's very curious and synchronistic. I just last week joined a Toastmasters club. Toastmasters is an amazing American invention by Dr. Ralph Smedley since, I think, the 30s. It's about communication. I joined the Toastbusters Moscow Toastmasters Club. Now you tell me why it is that I can join a Toastmasters Club in Moscow, and yet we're like on the verge of the Cuban Missile Crisis again. Anyway, I digress, but I appreciate your challenge, and Toastmasters is indeed about. So here's an excellent document. Again, thank you to the United States of America. This is called Toastmasters International put on a good show. So if I can round up some experts, I'll do my best. Thank you, Joel.
Well,
So,
Miles,
okay.
I think Skip said this brilliantly, the same thing. I mean, you bring up Toastmasters, it reminds me of Skip in India and how, we remove this top echelon and the people are like, what are you talking about? We never even knew about that. I mean,
That's right. My
so-
favorite statistic.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, would you repeat that? Because I think that
Okay,
applies
so-
to the Toastmasters where
so Joel-
we can all do that. But in the
So
big
I'm
picture,
referring to a statistic that appears in, I think it's in The Last Lion. It's one of Manchester's 3-volume series on the life of Winston Churchill. But one of the things that happened was that in 1953, which was 6 years after the end of the British Raj of India, the British reign, okay, Britain controlled India for 250 years. And in 1953, 6 years after independence from Britain, a group of anthropologists from the UK went to India for a period of 1 year to determine what percentage of the Indian population knew that the Raj of 250 years was over. What percent knew it was over? And what they found was that 99.9% of all Indians didn't know it ever began.
right. And what's interesting is that reminds me of what my dad said when he came back from Iraq right before Desert Storm. He's like, well, he certainly is photogenic, Saddam Hussein. I mean, he had billboards everywhere, but the people just went about their business. As if they didn't know, but they knew to be careful. But like you said, 99.9% didn't even know it was even there.
Yeah. And so I want to metaphorically talk about one other thing that does relate to Trump. Okay, if you take a bottle of Clorox, which is a cleaner, and you read at the side of it, it says it kills all viruses. Okay, kills viruses right on the side of it. Okay, but it doesn't mean you should drink it. Okay, and what Trump did was say you should drink it. You should consider drinking it to kill COVID, and so there are many people who are like lemmings who will follow a leader like Trump right off the cliff. They will drink the Clorox or they'll do whatever he says, and
Well,
Clorox will kill all viruses, but oh, by the way, if you drink it, it will kill you too.
well, pour the Clorox in the toilet, put the paper in the trash can. He got those reversed.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been a very good spirited discussion here, and we got through paragraph 263. We managed to get through 4 paragraphs this week, and so we are going to continue our discussion of Answer to Job next week with
Job starts talking.
Job starts responding to Yahweh, and we're going to talk about what that means. But what Jung said was Job put some good questions to God.
Well, and as our kind of ... stay tuned. I think that Job answers Yahweh thus: "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer thee? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further." So there's our hook for next week.
Yes.
70
answers to Job.
Right.
Okay, so Joel, it sounds like you have enjoyed this conversation today. We're delighted to have a genuine Jungian with us. Because
yeah.
This to meet you, it's been some sort of healing, because I don't know, in 2020, June 2020 to April, I lost 5 people of my family for C-19, but I stood still. But somehow this group is revigorating me to find. I had many ideas. There is a song that I want to tell you. My mind is filled with things to say. I think that I found I am between friends, good friends, and I am the things I want to say, I am saying to you now. And I really would, my wish is that, for example, America is standing in the need of a new Appomattox series became a reality.
Yeah. So Joel,
but
please let us know.
Don't get mad with me.
No, why would I get mad at you?
I appreciate your perspective. It comes in small and large together clearly. And
Yeah,
I think that's such a joy and such an asset. I appreciate that you're here. Stay with Miles. You're always bringing in other examples, and they have such a variety of scales. And to me, when we shift focus and redirect scale at the same time, instead of, oh, let's dive in too deep or let's go too high. I mean, it reminds me of the Jung quote of, for a tree to reach to heaven, its roots must grow to hell. And that both and instead of an either or, Miles and Joel, you both bring that. And it's salt and peppers the whole, I think, experience. And frankly, I mean, I love it when Skip and I are here, but it does tend to become a monologue between the two of us. And getting you two here, I love. Now we have a quaternity, so
Yeah.
Right.
this is,
Okay,
I
well, we have
appreciate
a
your
lot
respect
more
this.
than a quaternity because we have 10 people on YouTube. I just wanted to
So thanks, guys.
read one thing here, and then I want to sort of wrap up. But Zen Mode HQ says, it almost seems Jung is saying God is the collective unconscious and the unconscious collective is still integrating itself. And that is a big yes. He said that explicitly in his letter to David Cox, which you can find in the book entitled The New God Image, okay, on page 187. Now, Joel, in terms of this thought we've just had of having a conference, I think that we should consider doing that because it it dovetails with the confluence that we're already doing. Okay, we already are talking about psychology and art and religion coming together, and here we're talking about psychology with history coming together, or the history of psychology, or no, the psychology of history, right? Psychology of history is what we're talking about regarding Appomattox. And so I agree with you. We probably ought to have this group have a separate session.
Okay.
It can still be public, but a separate discussion only about that, where we talk about how it could be done and so on. And we would have the benefit of a YouTube audience as well to help guide us along. But it is very much in the wheelhouse of what we're doing with the confluence itself. Okay, that we're doing in June. So I urge you to come to the confluence. I urge, I think Miles is going to try to be there. I'm definitely going to be there. Jordan is definitely going to be there. And so these are discussions that can just continue very richly at that time. And
Today is just a seed.
yeah, it's just a thought, an idea of
Well,
what to
actually,
do.
Joel, you bring that up too. I mean, there's not just the psychology, but there's the astropsychology, because there's a Pluto cycle, which makes an empire cycle of 247 years. It's 247 to 265 to 282. But average it out to 250 years, every Chinese dynasty has had to reinvent itself every 250 years on average to continue. And what's interesting about this new Appomattox, which I love the way you brought that up in the paper, America standing in the need of a new Appomattox, that is
New
historically
Appomattox.
Appomattox. Yeah.
Appomattox.
Instead of
Yeah.
Adman, it's Opman.
I
New
will repeat
Appomattox.
this word 50 times.
Yeah, instead of the new Appomattox, that is so poignantly present as a milestone in the moment of history, almost like a 500-year floodplain instead of a 100-year floodplain.
Yeah.
This is a mega event that is happening right now. And we can either get dragged around by it, or we can, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, not learn from it. If we actually engage it and not waste the trouble, we can evolve from it to the next 250 years or the next 250,000 years. But it's interesting because psychology, astrology, astropsychology, geographic history, also, they're all aligning in a way where we can see something not only better, but more robustly, and
Yeah.
also beautifully more worse.
So,
We
Joel,
understand.
Yeah. So, Joel, when can we see a draft of your paper?
Oh, I will write a little more about, and I can send them to you. And of course, now I understand that I need your help to continue to write. Now I realize that I have more things to write
Yeah.
about, but as soon as the paper is ready, I will send to you.
Okay.
The concept is wonderful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to collaborate with you on that in some way. Not for any sort of credit, but just only to talk about, because obviously these are issues that I've done a lot of thinking about too. I mean, I was a history major in college, and I've been thinking for 20 years that we need to think about how to pull these things together. And
and you have a calculus of military history too that is direct. It's not abstract.
Yeah. So let me finish my thought, Jordan, so that we can get out of this. Our discussion is over for today. Okay. But
okay.
Yeah. But my point is that, I'm seeing these sorts of energies coming together for us with respect to what we're already doing with our confluence, and with a future confluence that we're already planning to do in California in 2023. And, maybe there should be something done in Brazil, although I want to see a new president in Brazil first so that I don't have to fear COVID. But anyway, it seems to me that it is, it's certainly something that has to be looked at, especially psychologists like you, Jungians like you, talking to historians who have been, basically what they've done up to today is they've set out dates and sort of superficial reasons why things happened at certain points in history. But I'm not sanguine about academics really making a difference on this, because I think they're too hidebound personally. Okay, but they may come to a conference about it because they fear for their future, and we're talking about their future. So
I have a closing thought.
All right, closing thought.
No tenure for them.
Yeah, the confluence is exactly the lectures that Joel's presented or is asking for. It's already underway. What I'm doing, I'm in a different operating system here in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so there needs to be the same happening up here. And to that end, what I've been in my creative process is only because of my collecting, a gathering, as Colleen calls it, from my personal life and experiences, and then boom, meeting Skip and learning who this Carl Jung is. So everything that is coming out of me is just a manifestation of the collective of everybody here and everybody who's a friend of Skip's organization. So thank
Okay,
you.
well, Skip has no organization per se. First of all, Skip has no organization per se.
No, that's
Secondly,
right.
Skip
Skip is
already
orderly. He's
Skip
orderly,
is
but he's
already
dynamic.
Skip is already overwhelmed with things to do right now. Certainly between now and our confluence in June, I'm just really overloaded. Almost nobody really knows what I'm doing on the business side as well as this stuff. So,
Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah,
the
okay,
position.
but we're not
I
going to
noticed.
talk about that right now, Jordan, please. And so I want to make a point about this, which is that you guys don't need Skip to necessarily be the organizer of this.
No.
What I'm willing to do is to, once we have Joel's paper available to us, okay, when that happens, and I understand, academic papers can take some time, but when we have it available to us and can look at these thoughts and see how we can expand upon them, and maybe before that, but certainly at that time, we can have a separate from this commentary and discussion on Answer to Job. Separate from it, we can have a conversation about what it is we're trying to do, and Joel, you certainly can think in terms of also being involved in being the chair of this, because I think you would probably give it better direction than I certainly do not have the time, and what I hope, and I know that my fellow Confluence organizers hope, is that we will show people by what we're doing in Helena, we will show people what to do. We don't have any monopoly on wisdom. Okay. We have the experience, and we know how that experience has changed us. And so we're trying to show that to others so that those others can take it back to their own area and do something similar. Okay. And, certainly I'm happy to try to help where I can. I'm happy to participate as appropriate. But please let us not get into the idea that only if Skip has the time and Skip will provide the direction and energy. No, I won't, because I just cannot right now. Okay.
Well, like I said, I'm in a different operating system,
Right.
so I can't even approach that, or I cannot even assume that.
Well, but the point is that you have to adapt it to your environment, to your different operating system. Okay. And so I can't do that for you.
Yes,
Ralph.
that's correct.
You're the guy who, saw something in what I'm doing 4 years ago and have been extremely loyal to me in that respect, but I cannot do everything. Okay. I have my limits.
Absolutely.
And
What I'd like to contribute here is that with Skip's programs, Skip's shows, Skip's facilitations, is that Skip has a set of groups that take what is abstract and what is reasonable and reason and feeling, except we throw all those in the trash can to simply have experience together. discussing. And what happens is then the abstract and the feeling and the reason and the feel are all included in the experience.
Yeah.
And in that, it's honestly, I have to say, it's very military in that it's action. You may talk about what you're going to do. There's a plan, there's a mission, but it never goes that way. That's where the whole phrase FUBAR comes from. And
Okay, so
so
there's
it's
another,
actionable.
yeah, so there's another comment that Zen Mode HQ says is Miles is acting like his operating system is static. That's very
Absolutely
dangerous.
not. Absolutely
Okay.
not.
Okay, so
You'd have to look at my website to see how I'm
Right.
trying to change the operating system.
right, I understand that, and I just wanted to bring that up so that you could respond to it, Miles.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
And
so
the operating system too is each of us.
yeah, okay, so
Yes.
thank you. We've had an extremely rich conversation. I'm strung out, honestly. I'm exhausted from my last 4 days.
82 hour.
of
Yeah,
life.
you
Okay.
had an event.
And so I need to call this event to a close today, but we'll see you next Sunday. And
Thank
we'll,
you.
We'll
Okay.
continue then. Yeah,
Miles,
peace,
good to
peace,
see
take
you.
care.
Good
Good to
meet
see you.
Good to see
Good to
you,
meet
Joel
you
and
too.
Miles. Thank you, Skip.
Bye-bye.
Ça va
Cheers,
bien.
everybody.
Thank you everyone for being with us.